back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys, so I'm here today to review two books that I really enjoyed for very different reasons. One is a contemporary fiction, which is quite out of the ordinary for me, and the other one is a literary fiction. So I'm going to start off by talking about the literary fiction, and that is Americanah by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This is a book that I was really excited to get to, and I did this as a buddy read with a couple of friends. One of them was my friend Helen, and the other one was Amanda, who's got a booktube channel too, so I'll link her down below. We had a great time discussing this, and I definitely think it's the sort of book that leans towards being discussed, because there is a lot that happens in this. We follow two characters. We follow Obinze and Ifemelu, and the two of them are growing up in Nigeria, and they become romantically involved quite early on in the story. They're young, they're free, they're just wanting to kind of live their lives, but unfortunately Nigeria's educational climate at the time this story is set is not very good, and they end up kind of going through a lot of educational turmoil, with teachers being constantly on strike and them not being able to learn or take their exams. And so we follow them throughout this time. Later, we see the two of them go off in very different directions. Ifemelu ends up leaving Nigeria to go and study in America once she has completed her kind of Nigerian exams, and she goes out there to try and start a life for both of them. She assumes, and so does Obinze, that he will come and join her once he finishes his exams, and hopefully he gets his own visa. However, this is not what happens, and Ifemelu's life in America is nothing like what she assumed it would be. Not only is everything very foreign to her and very different from what she expects, but also the world in general is much bigger and much more scary than she ever anticipated, and she finds herself in some really horrible situations where she has to do things she never thought she would do in order to just survive. We also follow Obinze's story back in Nigeria, but also when he moves out to London. There is something that happens that means that they cut communication, and we follow them on their separate lives and separate directions until later in the story the two of them do reunite, although that is quite close to the ending of this book. So I won't go into too much more detail on the plot because obviously I don't want to give it away, but I will talk about this writing, and I do think that Chimamanda has an incredible writing style that just really resonates with me and blossoms off of the page. She has a style that makes you connect to the characters really warmly. They feel like they're someone that you could know very easily, someone who could be walking down the street, and if they told you their story you'd believe it because it feels very realistic. A lot of what goes on in this story is stuff that I could certainly believe has happened to people in these sorts of situations where they're immigrants into new countries, and I do think that Chimamanda goes into great detail about how very difficult it can be to come into a different country and feel lost and afraid and unsure about what the customs are and what you should do and how you should get by. And she does a brilliant job of kind of explaining a lot of this to someone who, like me, is not an immigrant to the country or does not have this lived experience that she obviously does. I think that she does a fantastic job also of kind of reporting on these topics. She actually has Ifemelu set up a blog at some point in this book, and when she starts blogging we get to see some of these blog posts that she is posting, and many of them are completely fascinating and very interesting topics and ideas that the author is playing with via Ifemelu. Ifemelu's tone and the way that she talks about things is really easy to get into. She's a very relatable character and someone that you can trust and enjoy reading about, and even when she makes slightly bad decisions you can totally see why and get behind her. And I found that of the two characters, Ifemelu was the one that I'm most connected with, and I struggled more to connect to Obinze's story, which did surprise me considering Obinze is the one who comes to the UK, which is where I'm based, and I kind of know a lot more about UK culture than I do about American culture, but it still felt like Ifemelu was a closer personality to my own, and therefore I connected with her more. So on the whole, the writing in this was absolutely beautiful. There were some really poignant moments that are totally quote-worthy, and I know on Goodreads there's quite a lot of quotes from this book that you can like and stuff, and I've been liking them because it's such a good story, and it definitely has some really powerful moments. I would thoroughly recommend that you read this, even if you don't often read literary fiction. I think Chimamanda has a great writing style, and I think it's a style that would certainly pull in people who do possibly read fantasy, because it is quite detailed, it's quite interesting, it's very much based on the characters, and I certainly loved it. So I ended up giving this a really solid 4 out of 5 stars, and I would thoroughly recommend checking her out if you've not already, with either this or Half the Yellow Sun. I'm hoping that I'll read some of her other books very soon, so those are the 2 I've read. Let me know in the comments where you think I should go next, and that is that. Moving on to the other book I have to review for you, which is a contemporary read, and that is this one, True Things About Me by Deborah K. Davies. I've actually already read the other book that this author has brought out, which is Reason She Goes to the Woods, and I loved that book, so I picked this one up, which is her debut. Now, the author is actually a poet, I believe, and therefore the writing in this book is incredibly poetic at times and has a real sense of raw, brutal truth and honesty. It does not shy away from horrible topics. In fact, this is not a book I would recommend to people who have any triggers to do with abuse, rape, abusive relationships, controlling relationships. It's got pretty much everything you could think of. Violence, domestic violence. Yeah, it's got it all. So it is really triggery, and it is not a book I would recommend to people who are going to be upset by those sorts of things. However, with that said, this book is raw. It is so raw, it is so brutal, it definitely cuts to the heart of what it could be like to get into an abusive relationship and not be able to get out. It relies very heavily on sort of visuals, and you get all these very poetic moments of thoughts and things that the main character is going through. We see into her mind, we see what she's thinking, how she's managed to get into this terrible situation that she finds herself in. And we follow her journey from sort of a very successful young woman into almost a completely ruined woman, because she goes through so much and she has to put up with so many people trying to help her but not really knowing how, and eventually she just has to get to the point of, is she going to help herself or is she not? And that's what this story really focuses on. Is there help out there, and can you help yourself? How do you survive something like this? And it's brutal, so brutal, but I loved it. I do think it's the sort of book where if you know what you're getting into, if you know it's going to be a really brutal, shocking ride, then you'll probably enjoy it, because that's the sort of thing that you want going into this read. It was something I read because I felt like I wanted a bit of a shock to the system and something that was going to really resonate and really emote, and it did exactly that. I don't usually read contemporary because I tend to find it's either too predictable or too easy, and this is neither of those things for sure. So I really enjoyed it. I'd certainly recommend it if those do appeal to you, but do be wary going into this. It's not one I would mass recommend, that's for sure. So I gave this one a solid 4 stars as well, and again, it's a book that is certainly one for me, but probably not for everyone. Those are the 2 books I just reviewed. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Which one sounds more like it would be for you? What do you read when you're not reading science fiction and fantasy? Because this is the sort of stuff I like picking up. I'd love to hear that down below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon in my next video. Bye guys!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.